This is a video on how to make a flintlock pistol, prop or toy. I would say the quality of the product here in front of you is somewhere in the middle. You could definitely take this further and make a really authentic looking one. Or you could take some shortcuts and make a working one that looks good enough. But what you see here are all the parts spread out. I've just finished painting and staining and all that good stuff. So what I'll do next is I'll take each part as I'm putting the gun back together and just give hints and things to think about as you're building this. Alright, the first part I'm going to go over is the body of the gun, which is the most visible, most important part of the gun. I cut mine out of a 2x6 piece of pine about 20 inches long. You see here how I cut it out. Essentially what I did is I found a picture of a musket I kind of want to model over off the internet, and the musket had a 12-inch barrel. So what I did is I just blew the picture up on 2 pieces of paper so that the barrel was also 12 inches, cut it out, taped it on the wood, and just came back with a jigsaw and cut it out. And what you want to do here is make sure you get a good piece of wood. I found out after starting this project this piece of wood was horrible. But it's good enough for what I need it for. But if you look closely here at the gun, you'll see there's a big crack running through the thing. So that kind of sucked. And then also, the quality of the wood is horrible. It did not take a stain very well at all. And then because it didn't take the stain very well, the varnish looks like crap too. But again, it's going to be okay for me. But I mean, if you really want to do an awesome job at this, you know, you'd go with oak or something. But if you're happy, you know, then you're not too picky, then you can go with pine like I did. Once you have the basic shape of the body cut out, you're going to do a lot of sanding. I sanded with an angle grinder. I sanded with rotary tools. I did a lot of manual sanding. In particular, around the handle here, you want it to be round. You want it to feel good in your hand. All these edges need to be made nice and rounded and smooth. Then other than that, some of the major things you're going to have to do is I used a router and several passes of different shapes of routers, by the way, to get this trough out where the barrel's going to sit. I did screw up on the end here a little bit, but I repaired that with some wood putty. One of the bits slipped and messed it all up. But I fixed it. You know, some of the other things too. I used an airplane drill bit, so a really long drill bit to drill a hole straight down in here, and that's where the priming rod's going to sit. And of course, I got a lot of you know, just standard spade drill bits drilled in here for the mechanism for the flintlock. That's where all that's going to go. I ended up staining this with a red oak, and again, because of the quality of the wood, it was not a great stain job, but whatever. The other thing here too is you can see, hopefully you can kind of see there, where the plate for the mechanism with the flintlock goes. I actually carved that out so it sits into the wood. I did that actually by attaching a router bit to my drill press and then moving the wood underneath it. And that worked really well. The other job that I did on this was a paint job on the end here. Flintlocks traditionally had some kind of a metal capping on a ball or sphere end to keep it from falling out of your hands or maybe clubbing someone with it. I was again not very happy with how it turned out. I used Rust-Oleum metallic, and this was a metallic burnished brass, and I'd used it before. In the instructions it actually says you can apply directly to wet primer. That is not true, or at least not their own primer. So I used this Rust-Oleum primer, and it was a little bit wet when I applied it, and I had never done that before, but I was reading the instructions like, oh, I can just go ahead and do that because I got in a hurry. And I don't know if you can see here, the paint quality is just it's really bad. And there's some rough spots here too. But again, it's good enough for what I'm doing with it, and from a distance it looks just fine. Of course, after all this is done, after all the varnish and paint, I'm sorry, after all the stain and paint, I had a varnish to the whole thing to protect it and give it more of a shiny look, although again, I'm not very happy with the quality of the staining and wood on this one. So I guess we also have I should point out there's a cut here for the trigger, but we'll get into that later. The next piece I got here is the plate where the flintlock will be installed on, and it'll sit embedded a little bit on the wood. This is made from 1/8 inch steel. Again, I used my template to kind of rough it out with a jigsaw, and then using angle grinder and rotary tools shaped it and got it all nice and smooth. You can see I welded on a strike plate here. And the reason I did that, rather than going with like something that looked like a flash pan and the, a traditional flintlock strike, was because I made my gun be able to shoot caps from a toy cap gun. So that's why I went this route. You can go a different route if you want. And you can see here I got 2 holes drilled. And what I'm going to do is put in some bolts here, and I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, I got the little bolts in. I think these were like 632s, fine thread. And I put them in there, put a nut on them, got them in there as tight as I could. Ultimately, these were longer than this, and I cut them off to the length I needed. And we'll see later how the cap works on that. Alright, the next major piece here is the actual firing hammer. And this was cut out of 1/4 inch steel and done the same thing using an angle grinder, well, jigsaw, then an angle grinder, and then rotary tools just to smooth it out. This is just a similar shape. The actual shape, you probably have seen some flintlocks, is slightly different, but again, I was working kind of with what I had, and this was going to serve my purpose. What you want to do here though is this hole is tapped for a 1024 bolt. And I'm going to do that next year. You basically want to put that bolt in there and tighten it down as hard as we can. So that way basically the hammer is going to be attached to the bolt, which will be the axis for the spring and all that. And I'm going to go ahead and put all that together now, and then I'll describe what I got. I should quickly mention that these 2 pieces, along with the barrel, was painted with this Rust-Oleum black stainless steel. I really liked how it really looks like gun parts. If you don't want it that dark, they also make one called dark steel, which is just a little more silvery shiny. So, if you use one of those 2, I think you'll be pretty happy. And again, I used that same paint on the barrel, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. Alright, so here's my 1024 long bolt, and again I just cut it off to where I need it, and you'll see that later. I screwed that in as much as I can. I put a little washer on here, and then we have a hole here in the plate for it. Pretty tight fit actually. And there we have the basis of our mechanism here. What I'm going to go ahead and do next is put on the spring mechanism in here, and I'll show you that. Alright, I've reassembled the rest of the flintlock mechanism. So here was the front of it. On the back side, we got a spring here, a return spring. And that's basically, I got that from a cheap plastic mousetrap, and I only took half the spring, that's all I needed. So yeah, it came with a kind of a double spring, and I just cut the one spring off that I needed. Then I got a nut. I got 2 nuts here that are basically compressed against this piece of metal. This was cut out of 1/4 inch stock again, and the hole was tapped. So I tried between the 3 of these things, they are latched onto this bolt, and that's what we want. So on the spring, I got a little notch on the plate here where it goes. You can see it actually on the front side there, and then there's a little notch here in this piece of metal. So you'll see when the hammer comes back, that piece of metal turns as well, and that piece of metal is not only holds a spring, but it's what's going to hit the trigger. So the trigger is going to push on this to hold that back. And so that's how all that's going to work. So we're ready now to install the plate and flintlock onto the body of the gun. Important thing here is when I used a wood spade to drill this out, I actually made sure it lined up with the hole for the bolt that holds all my flintlock. So basically when we put this on, you can see there's a hole back here, and it's going to go through that hole, and actually that hole goes all the way to the other side here. But that's going to hold our axle for the flintlock. So we'll put that in here, and there it goes. Fits really good, and you can see there's the bolt. It was longer than I needed, so I cut it off, and you'll see it. Yeah, I don't know if you can see in the video, but it's spinning as I pull this back. So now we're ready to screw and put this in. And what I'm using for the screws is I have some really old screws I got from a piano that was made in the early 1900s. And what's nice about this is all the screws are, you know, flathead slotted, so they look older. This one was too long, so I cut it. And again, you didn't see this, but I have pilot holes, so I'm not just going straight in the wood. So I have pilot holes, and so what I'll do now is I'll use a screwdriver and go ahead and secure this. Before I put on the plate there and fasten in, I need to put in the trigger actually here. The trigger's pretty simple. You kind of have a T mechanism. There's several ways you can do it. This is just the way I came up with. Again, I did some welding in here, some curving of a metal. It's all painted in that brass color, same brass color I was talking about earlier on the butt of the gun. I have a little nail here. You can see it. You see it better that way, I don't know. There's a little nail here that comes through the metal that I clipped off and then made a little hook. And that little hook is going to hook into the spring here on the back. You can see in the back of the body there. So I got my groove here. So that trigger is going to set in there. And the trigger doesn't quite pull like a normal trigger. It pulls more down, but it works well enough as a trigger. And then that spring is going to be what returns it. And I'm going to pause the video here because there might be a few curse words trying to get that spring reattached. Actually, there were no curse words. I got a needle nose pliers in there and got that little nail hooked again, and you can see now, you can see the mechanism here of the, and it doesn't pull, you know, it doesn't pull very much. Just enough to let that trigger mechanism go. So, well, now I'll go ahead and fasten the plate on here and show you what it looks like. So here we are now. I have the panel on the gun and the flintlock mechanism. You can see I countersank my holes here so the old screws are nice and level with the paneling, or with the panel here. And what we're going to do and put on now is the trigger guard. Trigger guard was made from 1/8 inch steel. I think it was 1/2 inch wide. And the trigger guard's not 100% historical. And I didn't have all the right equipment to shape this properly. I did a lot of manual shaping, and it looks good. Traditionally, the guard would be closer at the bottom here to the trigger. I'm gonna go ahead and install this with some brass screws I also got from that same old piano, and I'll show you that next. I will mention here too, the part of the function of the trigger guard up in this area is to keep the trigger from overextending. If it wasn't for the trigger guard here, you could basically pull that trigger all the way out. So the trigger guard actually covers the back end of the trigger here near its pivot area, and that will keep the trigger from being over pulled. So I kind of made that multi-function there. So there's the trigger guard installed. Again, countersunk the holes so the screws fit in there really nice. Also, again, painted with that same brass paint. What we're going to do next is install the barrel. The barrel was made from 1-inch PVC, standard Schedule 40 PVC, and you can see I kind of cut out the end here, and that's so it fits down in this groove here, so I can secure it, and just fits real nice in there. So what I'll do next here is I'll use another brass screw to secure it up here, and then for for the second point of secure, I just drilled a hole right here where the priming rod goes. So the priming rod will kind of hide that down in there, and it's just a bolt that goes into a hole in the PVC. Actually, I can show you that here. Yeah, right here. And the bolt is not so long as to go into the barrel. It just grabs the PVC, and I didn't tap this or anything because PVC is pretty malleable. I just drilled a hole that was just slightly smaller than the screw size or the bolt size. I'm actually using a bolt, and then I just forced the bolt to grab in there and hold that barrel down. So I'll go ahead and do that. All right, now we got the barrel on, and wow, it's starting to look like a real flintlock pistol, huh? You can see here's the one screw I put in, and then also here's the other one. At this time here, maybe we should put in our priming rod, so the priming rod can really go in. It's just a wooden dowel with a bigger one on the end, kind of cupped it here, painted that same brass paint, and when I screwed it in, when I drilled the hole for it, I made sure I left the back end a little. I didn't screw it. When I was drilling it, I didn't drill it all the way out. So that way, when I put it in, there's a little tightness here, so it doesn't fall out. So now, as real looking as this thing is, we have to talk about safety. So in this country, you point something like this at a police officer, it'll get you shot. So with all toys and for props, you maybe don't want it maybe while you're using the prop, but if you're using this for your Halloween outfit, or your kids running around with it, or even while you're transporting it, I made this little orange basically cap to put on the end of the barrel here, and basically the orange tells police officers that this is a toy. I made it so it's removable, so if you're using it as a prop in a movie or a play, you can take that off. But again, if your kids are playing with it on the street or you're transporting it, it's probably a good idea to slip. So you could paint it on permanently if you want, but I just have some orange duct tape here around a PVC coupler, and I know that fits on there because that's PVC pipe. So. But anyway, be safe with your guns. And finally, as we talked about, I did make the gun able to shoot ring caps. These guys here. This one's an 8 ring cap, but you probably use other ones. I don't know if the spacing's the same or not. So what I've been doing is I just break the circle and break 2 off. I wanted the gun to be really loud, so I made it able to fire 2 caps at once. So I got a double one here, and you could fire 1 if you wanted, but I'm going to fire 2. So pull back till it locks into place. Oops, there it goes. I didn't quite get on the lock there. So you just put your caps on those bolts that were sticking up through the strike plate, and you are ready to go. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this will help you if you're in the process of trying to make a prop or toy or just a cool replica of a flintlock pistol, and good luck crafting.